Now, this is coming at a time where reports are saying that the Trump administration continues to target Iran's oil trade, the banking system, as well as the overseas financial networks. Now, the US authorities have sanctioned more than 100 vessels connected to Iran's so-called shadow fleets since the beginning of 2026. When it comes to Iran's currency, the rial has fallen sharply, recently trading nearly 1.95 million to US dollar on the open market. So now Iran is experiencing significant things like high inflation, shortages, as well as business closures and job losses. Now, Tehran continues to demand sanctions relief and compensation for damages caused by the US and Israeli attacks earlier on this year. Now, President Trump says that Iran should compensate people killed or injured by actions he attributes to Tehran. So this has been going back and forth, but now Iran says that it will not reopen the Strait of Hormuz without the US concessions. Now, Iran and Oman are in discussions, which would be the possible shipping corridor, but this direct US-Iran negotiations have remained stalled. Now, when it comes to oil prices, well, it's risen sharply, and the hopes of a quick Strait of Hormuz arrangement has now faded. Now, President Trump says that reviving the U.S. maximum pressure strategy after returning to office, saying that he's targeting nearly every stage of Iran's oil trade, from production and shipping to refining and payment. Now, the sanctions have made it difficult for Iran to access foreign currency and international banking services. Now, Iran has nevertheless developed a method to survive, which includes informal financial channels as well as discounted oil sales. Now, bartering arrangements are also in place in lieu of being able to access the international monetary system. But when it comes to trade with countries that are willing to challenge the United States restrictions on Iran. Now, this strategy intensified following military confrontation and disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz, which is very significant. Now, President Trump's strategy is apparent as he's calculating that, time will favor Washington, D.C., saying that essentially Iran's government must have financial problems when it comes to funding public services and supporting its currency and managing rising consumer prices while losing access to oil income, which is very significant for the nation's revenue and what would mean in terms of having access to international markets. Now, President Trump's comments suggest that he believes the mounting economic hardship will eventually force Tehran to accept the US conditions without another costly military escalations. The latest numbers on how much it costs the United States to be in war is about a billion a day. So that is a significant amount, which also is the reason potentially why the Trump administration is trying to now press economic pressures on Iran versus go into massive military operation. Now, this is significant because you have economic pressures that essentially does not guarantee political surrender when it comes to Iran. Now, Iran has endured decades of sanctions and has repeatedly transferred much of its resulting hardship to its ordinary citizens. And this is a time where we're seeing this take place, where this standoff and the stallment of this agreement is taking place. Now, Iran's economy has been under severe strain before the latest confrontation with the United States. So now you have this renewed pressure that has reportedly produced a sharp decline in the Iranian currency. It has rapidly increased food prices as well as transportation costs, and it has reduced oil and commercial revenue, as well as fuel and supply shortages. Now, the business closures don't help because of the wartime efforts, and that has essentially led way to widespread layoffs, and so really affecting the economy and the day-to-day ongoings of the average citizen. Now, there is also greater difficulty in importing essential goods as well as increased pressure on government finances. Now, this growing public frustration with both economic conditions as well as political pressure could essentially mount to what we saw earlier in the year, and if you recall, previous year, which was the protest that took place in Iran. Now, this is significant because this seems to be a tactic that the US is taking instead of ongoing military actions. Now, Iran does still remain a major energy producer, but the sanctions, as well as infrastructure damage and shipping restrictions, limits its ability to convert those resources, the oil resources, into dependable revenue. So now Iran says any reopening of the Strait of Hormuz must be accompanied by US sanctions relief, an end to military threats, as well as compensation for the damage caused by the United States, as well as Israel strikes on the infrastructure. And also part of that MOU, if you recall, that was signed, was to about releasing frozen Iranian assets and the recognition of Iranian authority of the waterway, which being the Strait of Hormuz, which essentially Iran would charge a toll for the passing vessels and as a way to recoup some of the damages it's endured during the war. Now, this pressure campaign is, of course, hurting Iran's economy, but the consequences are not just confined to Iran. Well, because when you look at the international markets, you have Brent crude that's risen above $86 per barrel during its highest uncertainty. And if you recall, prior to this war that started at the end of February of this year, you had crude oil at in the 60s dollar per barrel. Now, the higher oil prices threaten to increase gasoline prices that we're seeing here in North America, which affects transportation costs, that essentially affects the cost of food at the grocery stores. Now, when you have energy inflation, it also complicates the interest rate decisions in the United States, in Canada, as well as Europe. And the Asian economies are especially exposed because they purchase most of the Gulf oil and LNG exports. So now, when you have prolonged shipping disruptions, it could eventually weaken the global growth. Now, why this matters is that because President Trump's strategy represents a shift from what we've seen in terms of the immediate military escalations towards economic attrition. So now this is taking place, and we're going to bring you the latest development as this is ongoing and could change day by day based on what takes place between the two countries. But as of now, Iran has said that the two countries are not meeting directly to negotiate an end of war agreement.